Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Let's get straight into the true scary stories. The chair and the rope. It started with something as innocuous as a flicker on my screen. My old laptop had seen better days, so when the webcam light blinked on and off, I dismissed it as a simple hardware glitch. I'd been working late into the night, hunched over my desk in the dim glow of a single lamp, the kind of environment that makes the world outside feel distant and unreal. The moment I noticed the webcam light stabilize, I turned my attention back to my work, yet a strange curiosity lingered. For reasons I couldn't explain, I found myself staring at the little preview window in the corner of my screen. What I saw made my blood run cold. Instead of my cluttered desk and the pale reflection of my own tired face, the webcam showed a dimly lit room I didn't recognize. The room was sparse, almost bare, just a single wooden chair in the center and a thick rope hanging ominously from the ceiling. The floorboards were cracked and stained, and the walls were covered in peeling wallpaper that might have once been a pleasant shade of blue but had long since turned to a sickly gray. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, and even shook my head, thinking it was some sort of bizarre software error, but the image persisted. "This isn't real," I muttered to myself, my voice trembling with a hint of fear. My heart pounded in my chest as I clicked the settings, trying to figure out why my webcam was displaying such a horrifying scene. But no matter what I did, the image remained the same. I shut down the video call application, reopened it, and even restarted my computer. Nothing changed. Each time the webcam activated, it showed that same desolate room, the same chair, and the same unsettling rope hanging from the ceiling. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps someone had hacked into my webcam feed, replacing it with some pre-recorded footage to mess with me. But deep down, I knew that explanation didn't make sense. There was something too real, too immediate about what I was seeing. It felt less like a video feed and more like a live window into another place, a place that felt wrong, that seemed to radiate a sense of dread that seeped into my bones. Still, I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just a bad joke or a trick of the light. I'd deal with it in the morning, I told myself. But sleep didn't come easily that night. I couldn't shake the image from my mind, the chair, the rope, the air of despair that seemed to hang over that room like a shroud. Every creak in my apartment, every gust of wind outside, seemed amplified, filled with a malevolent intent. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts a jumbled mess of fear and confusion. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that I finally drifted off, my mind still haunted by that eerie, impossible vision. The next day, I tried to go about my life as usual, but the image never left me. Even at work, I couldn't focus. My thoughts kept returning to that room, wondering where it was, what it was, and why I was seeing it. Was it some kind of premonition? A ghostly vision of something that had happened, or was going to happen? I was terrified, but my curiosity wouldn't let it go. That evening, after another long day of struggling to concentrate, I sat down at my computer and opened the webcam feed once more. The room was still there, exactly as I'd left it. But this time, something was different. The chair wasn't empty anymore. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. I stared at the screen, unable to move, my breath caught in my throat. The chair, once desolate in the center of the room, was now occupied. A figure sat slumped in the seat, their head hanging low, face obscured by shadows. The rope that had dangled menacingly from the ceiling was now looped around their neck, pulled taut, yet not tight enough to lift them off the chair. The figure's hands rested limply on their knees, as if they had given up completely, resigned to whatever fate awaited them. The room felt even more oppressive now, the darkness within it so thick it seemed to seep through the screen. I wanted to look away, to close the laptop and throw it across the room, but I couldn't. My eyes were locked on the figure, searching for any sign of movement, any indication that this was some twisted prank. But the person remained motionless, almost as if they were aware of my gaze and were waiting for something, some signal to proceed with whatever horrifying act was to come. My heart pounded in my ears as I finally found my voice. "Hello?" I whispered, feeling foolish, but desperate for a response. To my horror, the figure slowly raised their head. It was a man, pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to look through the screen and directly into me. His face was expressionless, yet those dead eyes held a flicker of something that chilled me to the core: recognition. I wanted to scream, to shut the laptop, to run out of my apartment and never look back. But instead, I just sat there, frozen, as the man's lips began to move. At first, I thought the feed had no sound, but then I heard it, a faint, raspy whisper that sent shivers down my spine. "I've been waiting for you," the man said, his voice barely audible, as if it were being carried through a long, dark tunnel. I felt the blood drain from my face as I tried to comprehend what I was hearing. My mouth went dry, and I struggled to form words, but before I could say anything, the man continued, "You shouldn't have looked, but now it's too late." His words echoed in my mind, an ominous declaration that felt more like a curse than a warning. I finally found the strength to shut the laptop, slamming it closed with trembling hands. I pushed away from the desk, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, breaking the eerie silence that had filled the room. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the closed laptop, my mind racing. What had I just seen? Who was that man, and how did he know me? My rational mind fought to regain control, to convince myself it was some elaborate hoax, a psychological trick played by a deranged hacker. But deep down, I knew there was something far more sinister at play. The rest of the night passed in a blur of fear and paranoia. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound was amplified into a potential threat. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the man from the webcam was somehow reaching out from that room into my own, breaching the barrier between our worlds. I kept glancing at the laptop, half expecting it to spring open on its own and reveal that dreadful room once more. When dawn finally broke, I was a wreck, exhausted, terrified, and completely lost as to what to do next. The following day, I made up my mind. I needed answers. I tried researching anything that could explain what I had seen, but the internet only offered more horror stories, urban legends, and cryptic warnings about cursed video feeds and haunted technology. None of it gave me the comfort or clarity I was seeking. I decided I had to face it head-on, to confront whatever malevolent force had invaded my life. With a shaky hand, I reopened the laptop and clicked on the webcam feed, my heart pounding in my chest. The room appeared as it had before, but this time, the man was standing. He was closer now, much closer, his face filling most of the screen. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and filled with a malevolence that sent a wave of nausea through me. And then, as if sensing my growing dread, he smiled, a cold, joyless smile that twisted his face into a grotesque mask of malevolence. "I'm coming," he whispered, the words barely escaping his cracked lips, yet they resonated in my very soul. That's when the screen went black. I stared at the blank screen, my mind reeling. The sudden blackout felt like the final nail in my coffin, as if the world around me had plunged into an abyss from which there was no escape. The man's last words, "I'm coming," echoed in my ears, reverberating through the walls of my apartment like a sinister chant. My hands trembled uncontrollably, hovering over the keyboard, unsure of what to do next. Should I turn the laptop back on? Should I run? My instincts screamed at me to flee, to get as far away from this place as possible, but something stronger held me in place, an inexplicable compulsion to see this through to the end. I forced myself to take deep breaths, trying to quell the rising panic. "This isn't real," I whispered to myself, though the words sounded hollow, even to me. I needed to convince myself that it was all a trick, some elaborate mind game designed to scare me. But deep down, I knew there was something darker at work here, something beyond my understanding. I felt it in the way the air around me seemed heavier, charged with a malevolent energy that pressed down on me like a weight. Suddenly, a thought crossed my mind. Maybe the blackout was just a technical glitch. Maybe, if I restarted the computer, everything would go back to normal, and the nightmare would end. It was a desperate hope, but it was all I had left. I reached out with a shaking hand and pressed the power button. The laptop hummed back to life, the screen flickering before returning to the desktop. I hesitated for a moment, then reopened the webcam feed, bracing myself for whatever might appear. To my relief, the feed showed only darkness, as if the room on the other side had been plunged into night. I let out a shaky breath, a small part of me daring to believe that maybe it was over. But then I noticed something, a faint, almost imperceptible movement within the shadows. I leaned in closer, my eyes straining to make out the details. And that's when I saw them, two pale hands, reaching out of the darkness, slowly moving toward the screen as if trying to bridge the gap between our worlds. A scream caught in my throat as I realized what was happening. The man, whatever he was trying to cross over. I scrambled back from the laptop, knocking over my chair in the process. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I watched in horror as the hands reached the edge of the screen, fingers splaying out as if searching for a way to break through the barrier. The darkness around them seemed to pulse, as though the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. "No!" I shouted, panic overriding all rational thought. I grabbed the laptop and slammed it shut, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the chair as I tried to put as much distance between myself and the device as possible. The room around me felt like it was closing in, the walls seeming to warp and twist as if they were alive. I could feel him, his presence growing stronger, more oppressive, as though he was already here, lurking just beyond the veil of this world. My phone buzzed in my pocket, the sudden noise making me jump. I fumbled to pull it out, my hands still shaking as I answered the call without even checking the screen. "Hello?" I croaked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you close the laptop?" The voice on the other end was unmistakable. It was him, the man from the room. My blood turned to ice as I realized that he wasn't just in the room anymore. He was everywhere. In the phone, in the walls, in the very air I was breathing. "Leave me alone." I screamed into the phone, but there was no response, only silence. And then, a low, guttural laugh echoed through the receiver, sending a wave of terror crashing over me. The laugh was deep, mocking, filled with a malevolence that was beyond human comprehension. I threw the phone across the room, watching as it skidded to a halt near the door. My pulse raced as I backed away, every instinct screaming at me to get out of the apartment, to flee as far and as fast as I could. But just as I turned to run, the phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with a new message. I froze, dread rooting me to the spot. Slowly, I crept toward the phone, each step heavier than the last. I reached down and picked it up, my hands trembling as I read the message that had just come through. It was a single line, stark and final: "You can't escape. I'm already here." My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the message on my phone. The room around me felt suffocating, the walls seeming to press in from all sides. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the faint, rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. Every instinct told me to run, to flee this nightmare before it consumed me. But deep down, I knew there was no escape. The man, or whatever he was, had already breached the barriers between us. He was here, in my home, in my mind. With trembling hands, I dropped the phone and backed away, my eyes darting around the room, searching for any sign of movement. The shadows seemed to twist and writhe, forming shapes that vanished as soon as I focused on them. I could feel him, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the moment to strike. I was trapped, a prisoner in my own home, hunted by a presence I couldn't see but knew was there. In a desperate attempt to regain control, I lunged for the laptop, determined to confront whatever horror awaited me on the other side. My hands shook as I opened it, the screen flickering to life with an unnatural glow. I half expected to see the man's face filling the screen, his hollow eyes staring back at me. But instead, the webcam feed displayed the room as it had been before, the chair, the rope, and the darkness beyond. But this time, there was something new, something that hadn't been there before. Scrawled on the wall behind the chair, in what looked like smeared, dripping ink, were the words, "Welcome home." A cold shiver ran down my spine as I read the words over and over, the implications slowly sinking in. This wasn't just some random room I had been shown. Somehow, this place was connected to me, to my life. But how? The more I stared at the screen, the more I realized how familiar the room looked. The cracked floorboards, the peeling wallpaper, they mirrored the dilapidated state of my own apartment. But that was impossible, wasn't it? I forced myself to look closer, squinting at the details. My heart dropped as I noticed something I had missed before, a small, dusty window in the far corner of the room. Through the grime, I could just make out the faint glow of a street lamp, its light casting eerie shadows on the wall. It was the same street lamp that stood outside my own building, the one I could see from my bedroom window every night. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The room on the screen wasn't just similar to mine, it was mine. A sense of dread washed over me as I struggled to make sense of it all. The webcam wasn't showing some far-off place, it was showing my apartment, my future. And the man, the rope, everything was leading to this moment, to this place. I had been seeing a vision of what was to come, a twisted prophecy of my own doom. The words on the wall weren't just a taunt, they were a promise, a declaration of the fate that awaited me. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped, the air turning frigid as my breath puffed out in icy clouds. The lights flickered, and I heard it, a creak of floorboards, the unmistakable sound of someone moving in the room with me. I spun around, my eyes wide with terror, searching the shadows for any sign of him. But the room was empty, or so it seemed. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating, as I waited for the inevitable. Then, from the corner of the room, I heard it, a low, guttural whisper, the same voice that had haunted me from the beginning. "Welcome home," it rasped, and I felt a cold, bony hand brush against my shoulder. I whirled around, but there was no one there, only the dark, yawning space where the shadows gathered. The whisper came again, closer this time, as if it were coming from inside my own head. "It's time," the voice hissed, and suddenly, the world around me began to dissolve. The walls of my apartment crumbled into dust, the floorboards splintering and falling away into a vast, endless void. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was falling, plummeting through darkness, the world collapsing around me as the man's voice filled my mind. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me entirely was the chair and the rope, waiting for me at the end of my fall. And then, everything went black. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. The Whispering Night. I woke to the unsettling crackle of static, an unwelcome sound in the oppressive quiet of the night. My breath caught in my throat as the faint hum grew louder, more insistent. It took a moment for the confusion to lift, for me to realize that the noise was coming from the baby monitor. We had only moved into this house a week ago, and I hadn't even set up the monitor yet. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and strained to hear the distant voice that suddenly emerged from the static. The voice was low and soft, almost melodic, like someone whispering a lullaby just beyond the range of comprehension. My blood turned to ice as I recognized that it was speaking to my newborn daughter, Lilith. My heart hammered against my ribs. No one should be in her room. It was only me and her in the house tonight. My wife was away visiting her parents, leaving me alone with our newborn for the first time. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was still half asleep, but I knew better. Every instinct screamed at me that something was horribly wrong. I stumbled out of bed, the cool hardwood floors chilling my bare feet as I grabbed my phone for a flashlight. The pale beam of light cut through the darkness, casting long, eerie shadows across the walls as I made my way to Lilith's room. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning me inside. The voice had stopped by the time I reached the doorway, replaced by the rhythmic sound of my daughter's soft breathing. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door handle, feeling an invisible force holding me back, as if the very air in the house was charged with malevolent energy. The room was cold, colder than it should have been, given the mild autumn night outside. I flicked on the light, and the sudden brightness revealed nothing out of place. Lilith lay in her crib, swaddled in her favorite blanket, her tiny chest rising and falling peacefully. The baby monitor on the nightstand blinked at me, green lights dancing in sync with the low hiss of static, still ominously crackling. My heart slowly began to calm, the irrational fear slipping away like a bad dream. But something still didn't sit right. I hadn't set up the monitor, so how was it working? I reached for the device, intending to turn it off, but the second my fingers touched it, the voice returned. Louder this time, more insistent. "Shoo, little one. "Daddy's here. Don't cry." My heart nearly stopped as the realization hit me. The voice was mine. The monitor fell from my hand, clattering to the floor as the voice on the other end began to laugh, a sound that echoed with a deep, guttural resonance. It wasn't human, not even close. My pulse raced as Lilith's eyes suddenly flew open, her gaze fixed not on me, but at something behind me, something that I could feel more than see. I spun around, flashlight beam darting across the room. There was nothing there, only shadows. But I knew that something had been there just moments ago. Something was in this house with us. And it was playing games. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every shifting shadow made me jump, made my pulse race with the fear that whatever had been in Lilith's room might come back. The voice on the monitor kept echoing in my mind, my own voice twisted into something unrecognizable, something evil. I tried to convince myself it was just a malfunction, maybe some interference from a neighbor's device, but deep down, I knew better. There was no one around for miles. Our new home was isolated, perched on the edge of a thick, ancient forest that seemed to swallow sound and light. Morning came slowly, the first gray light of dawn creeping through the windows. I cradled Lilith in my arms, her tiny warmth the only thing anchoring me to reality. She had slept soundly, oblivious to the terror that had gripped me in the dark hours of the night. I wanted to tell myself it was all in my head, that stress and exhaustion were playing tricks on me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone in this house. I needed answers, or at least some reassurance that I wasn't losing my mind. As soon as the sun was up, I called my wife, Jenna, hoping the sound of her voice would ground me, bring me back to something normal, something safe. I told her everything, every detail, from the voice on the monitor to the feeling of being watched. She listened quietly, not interrupting, but when I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Maybe it's just the house settling," she finally said, her voice trying and failing to sound light. "It's an old place, right? Things like this happen sometimes." "Maybe," I replied, but we both knew that wasn't the answer. "I'm going to look into it. There has to be some logical explanation." We hung up, and I felt a little better, but not much. I spent the day researching the house, hoping to find something, anything that might explain what had happened. The place had been built in the early 1900s, a sprawling, rambling estate that had fallen into disrepair before being partially renovated by the previous owners. They had sold it quickly, far below market value, which should have been my first warning. But there was nothing in the records about hauntings, no tragic deaths, nothing that would point to the kind of malevolent presence I had felt the night before. By late afternoon, I was exhausted, frustrated, and no closer to understanding what had happened. I needed to clear my head, so I strapped Lilith into her stroller and went for a walk along the edge of the forest that bordered our property. The trees loomed high and dense, their dark trunks twisting and bending in ways that made them seem almost alive, as if they were watching us. The path was overgrown, little more than a dirt trail that wound through the underbrush, but it was quiet, peaceful in a way that the house no longer felt. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone, or something, following us, but there was never anything there. Lilith was content, cooing softly as she stared up at the canopy of leaves above. The farther we went, the thicker the trees became, until the sunlight barely filtered through, casting the forest floor in deep, ominous shadows. I was about to turn back when I saw it, a small, weathered gravestone, half buried under a tangle of roots and vines. It was old, the name and date nearly worn away by time, but I could still make out the words, "Beloved son, lost too soon." My heart sank as I realized it was a child's grave. I couldn't help but wonder if there were more, hidden beneath the forest floor, lost to time and memory. The air grew colder, and for the first time, Lilith started to fuss, her little face scrunching up as if she sensed something was wrong. That's when I heard it again, the voice from the monitor, drifting on the wind, calling my daughter's name. But this time, it wasn't coming from the house. It was coming from the forest. Panic gripped me as the voice echoed through the trees, a twisted version of my own, whispering Lilith's name over and over again. I tightened my grip on the stroller, my mind racing. I had to get us out of there, back to the safety of the house. But something deep inside me knew that safety was an illusion, that whatever was haunting us was not confined to the walls of our home. It was here too, in the ancient, foreboding forest, and it was calling to my daughter. I turned the stroller around, forcing myself to move quickly down the path, even as my instincts screamed at me to run. The voice grew louder, more insistent, as if it was getting closer, but I refused to look back. I couldn't afford to. My only focus was on getting Lilith away from this place, away from whatever darkness had taken root here. But the path seemed longer now, the trees pressing in on us, their twisted branches reaching out like gnarled hands. The light was fading, though it couldn't have been much past midday. It felt as if the forest itself was trying to keep us trapped. Finally, the house came into view through the thinning trees. Relief surged through me as I pushed through the last stretch, nearly sprinting across the yard and up the steps to the front door. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly that I almost dropped them, but I managed to get the door open and hurried inside, slamming it shut behind us. I stood there, panting, trying to catch my breath as I pressed my back against the door, as if my body alone could keep whatever was out there from following us in. The house was silent, too silent, as if it was holding its breath, waiting. I glanced down at Lilith, expecting to see her still fussing, but she was calm again, her wide eyes staring up at me with a strange intensity. It was as if she understood what had just happened, as if she could sense the fear that clung to me like a second skin. I wanted to believe that we were safe now, that the nightmare was over, but I knew better. This was only the beginning. I decided then that I needed help, someone who could explain what was happening, someone who could tell me how to protect my daughter. There was a local historian in town, an old man named Mr. Corbin who had lived here all his life. He was known for his extensive knowledge of the area's history, the kind of stories and legends that didn't make it into the official records. If anyone knew about the strange happenings in the forest, it would be him. I packed Lilith into the car and drove to Mr. Corbin's house, my heart pounding the entire way. His home was as old as he was, a creaking, weathered structure that looked like it had been standing for centuries. He welcomed us in, his eyes narrowing when I told him where we lived. His face grew grim as I recounted the events of the past few days, the voice on the monitor, the grave in the forest, the feeling of being watched. He listened without interrupting, his expression darkening with every word. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on Lilith, who was dozing peacefully in my arms. "You're not the first to come to me with stories like this," he said, his voice low and serious. "That house, it's got a history, one that the records don't like to keep. There was a family that lived there, long before it fell into disrepair. The husband went mad, killed his wife and child before disappearing into the forest. They say his spirit never left, that he still wanders those woods, searching for the family he lost." My stomach turned. But why us? Why is this happening now? Mr. Corbin sighed, his gaze distant. "Spirits like that, they're drawn to certain things, grief, fear, innocence. Your daughter, she's young, vulnerable. It's not just the house he's after. It's her. He thinks he can reclaim what he lost." I felt a chill run down my spine. How do I stop him? The old man's eyes met mine, filled with a sorrowful resignation. "Some things can't be stopped, only endured. But you have to protect her, no matter what. Don't let her out of your sight, not for a moment. And whatever you do, don't let him take her into the forest. If he does, you'll never get her back." His words echoed in my mind as I drove home, the sun setting behind the trees. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something that hadn't been there before, muddy footprints leading from the edge of the forest to our front door. They were large, too large to be human. And they stopped just outside the threshold, as if whatever had made them was waiting. Night fell quickly, the shadows in the house lengthening and deepening as if they were alive, creeping toward me and Lilith. The muddy footprints outside had chilled me to the core, but I knew I couldn't show fear, not now. I locked every door, bolted every window, and kept Lilith close, holding her tightly as I paced the living room, my mind racing. Mr. Corbin's warning echoed in my ears. "Don't let her out of your sight. Don't let him take her into the forest. But how could I protect her from something I couldn't see, couldn't fight? The baby monitor lay on the table, silent now, the earlier crackling static replaced by an eerie stillness. I didn't dare turn it on, terrified of what I might hear. Instead, I kept the house as quiet as possible, hoping that if I didn't draw attention, the thing outside would lose interest and leave us alone. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't. Whatever was out there had been waiting for us, and it wasn't going to stop until it got what it wanted. As the hours dragged on, the oppressive silence became unbearable. Every creak of the house, every rustle of wind outside sent my nerves into overdrive. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here, waiting for the inevitable. I remembered what Mr. Corbin had said about the spirit being drawn to grief, fear, and innocence. If I could find a way to break its hold, maybe I could save Lilith. But how? What could I possibly do against something so ancient, so powerful? Suddenly, the baby monitor crackled to life, filling the room with its familiar static hiss. My heart stopped as I stared at the device, dread pooling in my stomach. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even turned it on. But there it was, the sound of breathing, heavy and labored, coming through the speaker. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, as the voice began to speak again, low and rumbling, like something from the depths of the earth. Lilith, my sweet Lilith, the voice was different this time, deeper, more distorted. It wasn't mimicking me anymore. It was something else entirely. Come to me, my child. Come home. I felt a cold hand of terror grip my heart as I realized that this was no ordinary spirit. It was ancient, malevolent, something that had been waiting for centuries to reclaim what it believed was its own. And it had chosen my daughter as its prize. I could feel its presence now, seeping through the walls, the floors, the very air around us. It was coming, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The lights flickered, then went out, plunging the house into darkness. I clutched Lilith to my chest, her tiny form warm against me, the only thing grounding me in this nightmare. I backed away from the table, the baby monitor still hissing with static, the voice continuing its insidious whispering. I stumbled into the hallway, desperate to get away, but the air grew colder with every step, until I could see my breath misting in front of me. Then I heard it, a soft creaking, like floorboards bending under the weight of something heavy. The sound was coming from the front door. I turned, dread pulling me back into the living room, just in time to see the doorknob begin to turn, slowly, deliberately. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away, my eyes locked on the door, waiting for it to swing open. But it didn't. It just continued to turn, back and forth, as if something on the other side was toying with me, knowing that I was trapped, knowing that there was no escape. I had no choice. I had to run. I bolted down the hallway, racing toward the back of the house, toward the kitchen door that led outside. My only hope was to get to the car, to drive as far and as fast as I could. But as I reached the kitchen, I froze. The door was already open, swinging gently in the breeze. And standing just outside, silhouetted against the pale moonlight, was a figure, tall, thin, with impossibly long limbs and a face obscured by shadows. Its eyes, two pinpricks of malevolent light, locked onto mine. It was him. The spirit, the demon, whatever it was, had found us. Give her to me, it rasped, its voice echoing in my mind. She is mine. I backed away, clutching Lilith tighter, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But as I did, I felt her shift in my arms, her tiny hands reaching out toward the figure. She wasn't afraid. She was drawn to it, as if she knew it, as if she belonged to it. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This thing, whatever it was, had been with her since the beginning, whispering to her, shaping her, claiming her. The figure stepped closer, its hand outstretched, and I knew that I had to make a choice. I could run, but it would follow. I could fight, but it was too strong. Or I could give in, let it take her, and hope that it would leave me alone. But as I looked into those eyes, those cold, unfeeling eyes, I knew that even if I gave her up, it would never stop. It would take her, and then it would come for me. I made my decision. With a scream of defiance, I turned and ran, out the back door, into the night. The figure's laughter echoed behind me, growing louder as I stumbled into the forest, the trees closing in around me, the shadows deepening. I ran blindly, branches tearing at my skin, roots tripping me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The voice followed me, taunting me, promising me that it would find us, that it would take her, that it would never, ever stop. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the laughter stopped. The forest fell silent, the air still. I slowed, my breath ragged, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked down at Lilith, expecting to see her terrified, but she was smiling, her tiny hands reaching out towards something behind me. I turned, my blood running cold as I saw the figure standing there, its eyes glowing in the darkness. It raised its hand, and I felt a pull, a force that I couldn't resist. I stumbled forward, unable to stop myself, as Lilith was torn from my arms, disappearing into the shadows. I screamed, reaching out, but it was too late. She was gone. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me was those cold, unfeeling eyes, watching, waiting, as the forest closed in around me. The end. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Thanks for watching.